Hello there again, folks, and we are back with another Oscar tier list video. This time, of course, is the documentary feature category of looking at all of the nominees and winners of the 21st century so far from the year 2000 through 2024. 125 films like the international feature category, and obviously we have the same tiers as always. This one I hopefully think will most likely be more of a faster paced one, I'll be honest. But I would probably say what the subjects are for these movies if you want to go and check these out. Keep in mind, these are all in my opinion, and let's see if there is going to be any of them that are going to make it in the best in half of this ranking. So let's see if any of them are going to make in these four and see what of them are going to make in these five. But so we will begin this up obviously from 2000 all the way up to 2024. So we start up with the year 2000 with our winner for that year, Into the Arms of Strangers: Stories of the Kinder Transport, which is about the British rescue operation known as the Kinder Transport, which saved the lives of over 9,000 Jewish and other children from Nazi Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Danzig by transporting them via train, boat, and plane to Great Britain. These children, or Kinder in German, were taken to foster homes and hostels in Britain, expecting eventually to be reunited with their parents. So this is basically about like young Jewish kids that managed to actually be in Great Britain in order for them to survive the Holocaust. I would say the beginning really kind of started out good, but it just I think something kind of went wrong in the filmmaking process of this. Not, I don't know, maybe the directing or the editing, but I think maybe the pacing kind of went a bit off, so I have to give this a C. Next up is actually the last documentary in general out of all these 125 movies that I had to watch, and that is Legacy, which tracks three different generations over 5 years of a family in Chicago that lives in the Henry Horner Homes public housing. Their lives change, however, after a life-altering event. The murder of a family member slowly changes them to have a more positive outlook on life. This one is actually the one document. I have a bit of an interesting story about this. Is that I tried to find this movie somewhere online, like it's not available. Like this is one of the few PBS documentaries, and I try to find it like on YouTube or any streaming platforms, but no. So I had to buy the DVD off of Amazon, and wasted kind of $14 on that. So I don't remember anything about it, so I have to give it an E. Next up, Long Night's Journey into Day. Not Long Day's Journey into Night, not to be confused with a play and stuff like that. It's about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in post-apartheid South Africa. I did remember and actually did enjoy this one. I believe I did saw this, yes, on YouTube. I have to give this a B. Now, some of my thoughts on these movies might not be able to get me clearer out of the way because I basically kind of just describe the subject matters, and it's kind of hard to give me my thoughts on some of these films, except when we get to some of the more recent films. Here's another PBS documentary, Scottsboro and an American Tragedy, which is on about the longest running and most controversial courtroom pursuits of racism in American history, which led to 9 black teenage men, being wrongfully convicted of raping a white woman in Alabama on a train. Wow. This is obviously one of those few documentaries that you do really get angry of, like, the real life villains behind it and how the racism really was. Like, not that unfortunately that these 9 boys had to deal with their innocence. And also the whole trial of the main lawyer of the courtroom for representing these 9 boys who managed to save a lot of mafia leaders out of prison, tried to do a different approach to save these 9 black men, but you know how the racism works. Yeah, yeah. The first hour is really, really good. I really wish there might have been a little bit more, but I am giving this a B, which would be a B plus. And last for the year 2000, Sound and Fury, which is about two American families with young deaf children and their conflict over whether or not to give their children cochlear implants, which is a surgical implant device that may improve their ability to hear but may threaten their deaf identity. I am giving this one a C. It would be a C plus. Obviously you got two different perspectives and they're kind of families, but the one who is the daughter of the family that we have that is primarily has deaf parents, specifically, yeah, their parents are both deaf, and she really wants to, their daughter really wants to do these cochlear implants so she can hear a little bit better and even potentially maybe even speak. Obviously, they get to interact with people that have sign language, those who have cochlear implants. Yeah, and obviously the real life dot there would actually be a follow up short film on this. I have not seen that sequel short, so I can't really say. That the daughter now, obviously now has a cochlear implant. She did a TED Talks video you can watch on YouTube. It's just that I think we kind of focus a little bit too much on one of the families and not the other one who does get the cochlear implant. I've yet to see the follow up short, so I can't really say anything about it. On to 2001, starting up with Children Underground. And it sets around Bucharest, Romania, that explores the lives of five children who are shown fighting, abusing themselves, and becoming addicted to Orlock as they primarily live underneath the subway station areas in their country after some sort of big country revolutionary movement after massive, I don't know, some sort of when the country finally got a little bit more freedom. And this obviously shows what is happening with all the kids, whether it be a young girl who really takes herself seriously as the leader, one that has more kind of an addicted person, unfortunately, and then you have a big sister little brother connection that are trying to away from like abusive parents and parenting and stuff like that. It is very very sad to see where this is going. But I have to give this a C. I think it's just I think we didn't get a lot of the perspective of those that are the adults that are trying to help these kids, specifically those in like those like services that usually does for like helping a lot of these people. I really wish it would have been a lot more, but I really want to know where these five kids are doing right now. I think I did saw an article about this, but I don't really know what has happened to them. But I think like that I can remember, but it is a very unfortunate one happened in Romania. Next up is Lalise Kins, The Legacy of Cotton. And there's two storylines that are going on in the American South regarding some African American communities in the Mississippi Delta after over 150 years after the abolishment of slavery, where we focus on the main Lali, which is Laura Lee, the great granddaughter of a former slave, and now in this standard she has like so many like sons, daughters, and grandchildren, and she's making her kids doing a lot of work for her. Um, Almost like unfortunately that aspect kind of really kind of the past events of her great grandmother might have some sort of influence on that, unfortunately. And the other one looks at one of the schools, the West Talakari school system, where the new superintendent is trying to have a lot of improvements to see if they can actually get a lot more school benefits from this, like from like other departments, like even the state or for the country and stuff like that. I am giving this one. I'm gonna give a D. Now the school system definitely seemed a lot interesting, but Lali's story, like, okay, I do understand where she's coming from, but she's just it just makes her very unlikable when you're watching this movie. And I also now realize that this is not in the correct order, but we do go into our winning documentary for 2001, Murder on a Sunday Morning, which focuses on the Brenton Butler case in which a 15-year-old African American boy was wrongfully accused of a murder in Jacksonville, Florida. I am giving this one a B. This would a B plus. This would be my pick. In I do think the Oscars did make the right choice here. One of just understanding the trial of how sometimes this like I think this is what I think what was missing in Scottsboro and American Tragedy. Obviously, it does focus a lot more on the defense attorneys and how the police is centering around this as well. I really wish they did a little bit more on like obviously in Scottsboro a little bit more of what was going on the prosecution side, but I don't think I remember that a little bit in Scottsboro though. But I think this one worked a lot better on Murder on a Sunday Morning, and I do think they made the right choice with the right film. Next up, Promises, and this is one of the Israel-Palestinian conflict movies. As this documentary focuses on the perspective of 7 children living in the Palestinian communities in the West Bank and Israel neighborhoods of Jerusalem. It's just basically like a lot of kids trying to have a massive connection from not just their cultures but also the massive situations they're going in. I'm giving this a C, but it would be a C plus. I think maybe if we had a little bit more, I don't know about of an adult's perspective, but I wish there was a little bit more development. I would say like there are some nice moments when some of the Israel kids go to some of the Palestinian house, but obviously we don't go much in more information about like what the conflict between the two countries at that time was. This was like filmed during the late 90s. I think for at least a 5 year period from 97 7 all the way up to 2000. I really want to know like what happened during those gaps, like if there was a narration or a word explanation, like when using in a couple of documentaries, of course, like a paragraph or something like that. That's what it is. And then War Photographer, as this is about the famous photographer James Natchaway, as well as telling the story of an iconic man in the field of war photography, as the film addresses the broader scope of ideas common to all those involved in war journalism, as well as the issues that they cover. So this is kind of basically like finding out what's like how these journalists are dealing with when they're not when they're in this middle of the conflict of between multiple countries and stuff like that, or areas during the war. Whether it be the post-war in Kosovo, the poverty and riots in Jakarta, Indonesia, Ramallah in the West Bank, a sulfur mine at Aijin in East Java, Indonesia. Obviously, there is a bit of New York City in New York, but I think more in the office thing. Like, and yeah, there are a couple of offices that do take place, like in Hamburg, New York City, and Hamburg, Germany, and Tosco, South Africa. So, like, obviously, the massive wars in the bank, Kosovo, and Indonesia specifically. I am giving this one a C. It does really have a lot of great build up to it, but it's just I think something is not right with me. I don't know if it's like I think it's just going back and forth between the offices and the war parts might be the pacing kind of probably might be the issue. Now into 2002 with our winner in this one, probably one of the best winners in the category's history of the 2000s or the century so far, Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine, which is about his exploration on suggestions of the primary causes of the Columbine High School massacre and other acts of gun violence as he focuses on the background and environment in which the massacre took place and some common public opinions on the assumptions about related issues about gun control, especially with the NRA, which at the time, of course, was led by the one and only Charles Helton, I believe. Yeah, Charles Helton, the star of Ben Hur, of course, the Oscar-winning star, on his conservative beliefs. And obviously, there are many other interviews and even an animated segment from one of the guys behind South Park. I forget which one it was, but yeah, this is going in S. This is a movie that has phenomenally aged well. I mean, just wow. Obviously, the way how Moore explores like everything, not just obviously what's been going on with the gun violence in the U.S. and how this violence kind of started up in the histories of the wars and then the slaveries, courtesy of the animated segment, and then obviously, unfortunately, what would happen in Columbine, but also exploring in Canada of how they deal with violent gun violence, and it seems like it's not really a problem over there at all because of how they have better laws when it comes to guns instead of here in the United States. And obviously, how Moore investigates how perpetrators in the massacre got their weapons and stuff like that, courtesy specifically through Kmart. So yeah, that's something. But yeah, the way how Moore kind of really treats not just obviously how he kind of views how all the politicians are, but also how civilians are, especially those that have survived the massacre, and most notably 2 people he does interact with. Next up, Daughter from Da Nang, which is about an Amero Asian named Heidi Bub meeting her biological family in Da Nang decades after being brought to the United States in 1975 during the Operation Bablift at the end of the Vietnam War. I am giving this one a C. Now, it really started up really well when, obviously, the whole scenario of what's going on, why she was taken away from her biological family after the end of the, even after when the Vietnam War came to an end. But then, obviously, when she returns to her homeland, there are some things that she does understand, but then there are some things she really doesn't like. And I think the latter of which kind of really kind of prevented me from not really getting big and much into the movie, because you can understand why she might not have had a better life in her homeland compared to her time in the U.S. after when the U.S. military took her away from it. But we don't know how things would have been if that war obviously did not exist. And that was a PBS documentary. And here's another PBS documentary, Prisoner of Paradise, which looks at the true story of Kurt Geron, a German Jewish cabaret and film actor and director in the 1920s and 30s who was deported in a concentration camp in Czechoslovakia during World War II. And there he was ordered to write and direct a Nazi propaganda film. I am giving this one a C. Really interesting story of where this guy was before World War II officially began. It is very sad that he unfortunately had to fall under the Nazi rule of what they want him to do, of making that propaganda film, which I've not seen and I don't think I want to. Even though I think there are snippets of it in the documentary, but yeah, I just even though like sometimes yeah your opinion could potentially, but I think it just could be the pacing of the movie itself, maybe why I had to put that in C. It's not like the subject matter, but it's more how it was taught through the film. Next up is Spellbound, and no, not the Skydance animated film that just came out. This is a documentary that follows the competitors of the 1999 Scripps National Spelling Bee, in the perspective of at least a few of the kid contestants from different states and different cultures. I am giving this one, I'm gonna give this a B plus. It is very interesting to get to see different perspectives of the spelling bee throughout that time, and just see how each of these kids, with their personalities, of how they have their unique journey growing through this iconic spelling bee. So it is a pretty great film to understand where these kids are coming from, because you don't usually talk a lot about spelling bees as a YouTube, and I have seen a couple of spelling bee experience, I believe, during my elementary days. It mainly just one, but I don't usually see that. You don't usually see that like in high school and stuff nowadays, because this is more of a kid's thing instead of a teenager thing. And then Winged Migration, which is about showcasing the immersed journey routinely made by birds during the migration. Specifically in Europe with European robins, cuckoos, and kingfishers, uh, Gevnly geese, comet crane, balkan geese, whooper swans, like from all different portions of the country. It's just basically birds just going to obviously their migration stuff. It's not terrible, but I have to give it an E. Now we're into 2003, and we begin with Balsaros, which is about Balsaros immigrating from Cuba during the Petro Espacia, I do apologize, period, and during the 1994 Cuban Rafter Crisis. And it's just basically called Cuban Rafters for its English title. I did watch this without the subtitles. It is very interesting to understand where you're coming from, but and especially under the communist regime. But I think maybe because since I didn't watch the subtitles, because there's no way to find it without the subtitles, but I did watch in its actual language, I might have to get that not an E because it wasn't boring, but it was the subject's interesting, so I have to give it a D. Next up, Capturing the Friedmans, which follows closely an American family accused of pedophilia. I can't believe I had to say that, because if this video was monetized, it would have been demonetized already. Like Balsaros, the subject was interesting, but I think it didn't work well execution-wise, so I have to give that a D. On to the winning film, The Fog of War, 11 Lessons from the Life of Robert S. McNamara by Errol Morris, who's notable for mainly famous for making The Thin Blue Line back in the late 80s. which obviously explores about Robert McNamara and his involvement in the Vietnam War. I have to give this a D as well, and I'll be honest, I almost fall asleep watching it. I don't think it's a terrible movie. I just think, obviously, there were 11 lessons, but it just took forever to explain them. Now, My Architect, A Son's Journey, which is about the career and familiarity relationships of the director's father's architect, Louisa Kahn. So basically, his son's journey to find out what his father did during his time period. I am giving this one a C. The journey really kind of started out okay, but it just kind of lost a lot of interest to me during this later on, like after the half hour mark or something like that. And then we have The Weather Underground, which looks at the rise and fall of the radical politician group of the same name. American one to be precise. Like Balsaros and Capturing the Fragments, the subject seemed interesting, but I don't really remember. But the thing is, I don't really remember much of it, so I have to give that a D as well. Yeah, 2003 was a very weak lineup, so just kind of by default, I would go with My Architect of Sun's Journey, but not by much. In terms of 2000, it's between. I think I would have given this to Long Night's Journey into Day for 2000. By the way, on to 2004, and we start with our winner, Born into Brothels, Calcuta's Red Lights Kids, which looks at the children of prostitutes in Sonagachi Kulakata's red light district. It's very sad, unfortunately, where these kids, unfortunately, what they have to do. Not what you're thinking based on what I said, but more of labor work. I have to get that the C, because it is very sad. The subject really is very, very unfortunate. But like some of the others, I just think the movie itself, the way how it's paced, just didn't work. Next up, the story of the Weeping Camel, which is about a family nomadic shepherds in the Gobi deserts trying to save the life of a rare white bacterial camel, which is Camelus bacterianus to be precise, and that's basically a calf, after it was rejected by its mother. One thing to note about this is that this was actually submitted for international feature the previous year for Mongolia, but it did not get nominated. So it was actually allowed to qualify for its U.S. release in 2004. So that means City of God is not the only film that was submitted for the international feature category to not get nominated, but it was allowed to qualify for its U.S. release. So that's pretty interesting. I'm gonna get this a D, but it would be a D plus. Once again, subject very interesting, well unique story I tell you, but I think it just how the filmmakers told the story just didn't work well. Here is now a fan favorite, Super Size Me from Morgan Spurlock. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier, like a year or two ago, unfortunately. And it's basically about him eating nothing but McDonald's for at least 30 days to see how his health would be. I know this is a fan favorite, but I'm going to have to give this probably a C. Now, his journey of basically doing this seemed very interesting, and I will give him credit for making me doing something here. One thing advice I got from the film that really helped me a bit. Normally I used to usually most of the time, specifically regarding ice and soda, and this was kind of something I did a little bit even before I saw the documentary. If I would get a soda at a fast food restaurant, normally a lot of people would usually fill their entire soda cup with ice. But then I kind of realized that if you put less ice in your soda cup, the less ice you get, the more soda you get. And I think that would kind of really work well whether I go to McDonald's, Wendy's, or Burger King or any other fast food joint. If I want a soda, I would just get less ice and then I just fill up the cup because I just want to have more of the soda instead of the ice. And I even stopped having ice in my soda if I have soda at home. Unless if it's a new bottle and it's not warmed up, that's the only exception. But I don't usually do ice a lot anymore in my sodas because it did kind of had to gain a little bit. I'm not really that fat, um, but I do kind of not go in the ice diet anymore. Um, Yeah, there's not really a lot of, yeah, obviously the supersized thing. I'm glad I wasn't. I don't remember my experience of the supersized thing during that time. I think I was just too little when the movie came out, or yeah, I don't have a remember experiencing in that. But it is an interesting approach to see how somebody would eat fast food for 30 days, and I know. Interesting enough, Liam Convideo would do a McDonald's diet for 30 days, I believe, as well. Um, if I'm correct, and he doesn't do that anymore. But I know there was a sequel he did, but that was straight to streaming instead of like straight to theater, so I've not even watched that film. But yeah, I think there was some portions of the movies I really, not really on him per se, but I think it was just there was not a lot of not really in a negative way an entertainment purpose in the film. So I think that could be the reason why I do give him credit for the great advice that he gave me, but it's just that I think trying to do an entertainment format maybe not the best way. Next up, Tupac Resurrection, which is of course about the late rapper from his unbringing to his untimely death, with a lot of narration from a lot of his, I would say almost like poems or his lyrics that he would turn into songs and stuff like that. I didn't really listen to any music prior to this. I know who he was, um, based on my research of the famous rapper. But I'm sorry to say that also all you Tupac and rapper fans, I have to give this an E. I think probably doing in that format how the movie was told just didn't work for me. And then finally, we got Twist of Faith, which is one of the few documentaries about the sexual abuse of priests in the Catholic Church, as this focuses on one guy on his dealt with it in Toledo, Ohio. I am giving this one a B plus. It is very unfortunate what this young man is dealing with his um, issues that he has been dealing with when he was a kid, and then of course obviously dealing with now with his wife and his own daughter, and is afraid that his daughter would do it, despite of him still being a Catholic person, still going to church, but it still really kind of haunts him. And I really do support of what his dealt with is going on, even though I am a Catholic myself. But I do understand people's perspectives when it comes to dealing with the dark side of the Catholic Church. Into 2005, and we begin with Darwin's Nightmare, which is about the environmental and social effects of the fishing industry around Lake Victoria in Tanzania. I am giving this one a C. It is also very interesting getting to see a lot of the perspectives from different portions, not just in Tanzania, but I believe also from the Swahili and the Russian people that are involved with this, and just seeing how they do with their fish goods and stuff like that. It is very interesting, but I only think the probably the reason I didn't put it in B is because I didn't watch the entire movie with the subtitles in it. It's like 85% in English, but there's a bit of Swahili and Russian that I couldn't really understand, but just looking through the perspective, and it's just I don't really getting really gotten fond of with it compared to all the citizens we go in the perspective in Tanzania. Next up, Enron, the smartest guys in the room, from one of the notable famous documentary filmmakers, Alex Ginby, which looks in the rise and fall of the estate corporation. I am giving this one a D. Once again, subject seemed very interesting. Execution wise, told the film not that strong. 20 days and 20 nights, the Emperor Penguin marched to. I don't want to do that Billy Crystal Morgan Freeman impersonation. But yeah, we're into our winter of 2005, March of the Penguins, which obviously looks at the daily lives of the Emperor Penguins. I've only have primarily seen the English version, of course, with Morgan Freeman. I've yet to see the main dub in French, though. I cannot find the main dub in French anywhere. This is going to be a bit of a controversial opinion on this one. Yeah, I just I just couldn't get into March of the Penguins in general. I'm sorry. Maybe when I watch its main dub in French, maybe, but not even Morgan Freeman can do anything for it. Next up, this is a pretty fun movie, I would say, and that is Murderball, which looks at the American wheelchair rugby players facing against the Canadian wheelchair rugby players at the 2004 Paralympic Games. This movie is a really lot of fun to watch. I have to give this an A. It is definitely a fun movie here to seeing all the players from both the American and Canadians' perspectives on how they want to build this massive support for this big game. And now one of the fewest movies, documentaries specifically, that does look in the realms of American politicians. And this is Street Fight for Marshall Curry, who has a couple of documentaries that he had previously been nominated, that has also been nominated here. He would win in 2019 for his live action short film, The Neighbor's Window. This one is about the 2002 Newark, New Jersey mayoral election campaigning. From the perspective of Councilman Cory Booker challenging against the accompanied mayor Sharp James, considered one of the real life villains, you can say, in not just the city of Newark, but one of New Jersey's real life villain politicians. And Cory Booker does sound a name that sounds familiar because if you remember last year, he gave the longest speech ever in the U.S. Senate. Over a day, like almost over 24 hours. Not even for a bathroom break, not even to eat or drink. He did that last year, and everyone was impressive by that. Now going into like before he became part of the Senate, going into when he started out as a politician, trying to campaign for the mayor in Newark, I have to give this one a B. His journey is really interesting to see how he goes from compared to the evil Sharp James. Obviously, what would happen if you know what the real life story is, it also will explain in the end credits, but seeing where Cory Booker is as a person, trying to save, where he is also from in a community that is similar to where he witnessing the dark side of Newark that Sharp James is not going to, especially at his own African communities, unfortunately. But Cory Booker really knows that he wanted to be a true hero for not just New Jersey, but for the city of Newark as well. 2006 here, and we begin this year with Deliver Us from Evil, as it explores the life of an Irish Catholic priest named Oliver O'Grady, who admitted of having molested and raped approximately 25 children in Northern California in the late 70s through the early 90s, and the survivors are trying to expose this cover up from that was all covered up from the bishop at the time, now the cardinal at the time, who is now considered one of the most disgraced U.S. cardinals, Cardinal Roger Mahony, who is now obviously the retired Archbishop of Los Angeles. I am giving this one a C. I think Twist of Fate told it a lot better. I think because Twist of Fate told it from one perspective, obviously Deliver Us from Evil told in the multiple perspectives, but I believe that the fact that they also interviewed the real life priest, that's just a bit scary to see like that. And obviously, the moment when some of the survivors tried entering the Vatican to deliver a message to Pope Benedict XVI, because this was, I believe, filmed in 2005, so the year he was just elected, and after the death of John Paul II. So because this was around the time when Benedict XVI began his papacy, and they were denied entry, even the film crew. Because this was at the time, of course, that was the same year also when the Archdiocese of Los Angeles' sex abuse report was reported, and that's when the now Cardinal Mahony was now considered a disgrace to the Catholic Church, and still is to this day, as he still is living as of January 11th, 2026. I just think probably there was just a lot of, like, I do support those survivors, but I think there was just too much that was going in, probably in a fast paced, I would say. Next up is the winning film from David Guggenheim and In Give Truth, which is a basic about former Vice President Al Gore's, basically his campaigning slideshow on global warming, or climate changes, as you know, throughout his journey of trying to address this issue. A lot of people also really love this one, and this also won for Best Original Song for Melissa Etheridge's song "I Need to Wake Up," the first documentary to win that category so far. Like March of the Penguins, this is going to be a controversial opinion. Yeah, the subject definitely seemed interesting, but I think it was the execution of the film just probably did not work well. I think the climax was really, really good. But I think the rest of the film I just didn't really remember it as much. Next up, Iraq in Fragments, which looks at many different kid residents' viewpoints or army viewpoints in Sunna, Shiite, and Kurdish during this massive war going on in either Iraq or Afghanistan. Obviously, of course, what happened after 9/11, of course. And the kids are kind of questioning what's going on. There's also another documentary also about this that's also in this category that did a lot better. I'm gonna give this one a D. I think it did start out pretty decently, but I think something went wrong in the pacing aspect that probably went off. I don't know if it was from the armies because it's been a while since I've seen this movie, and here we go again with that. Um, yeah, so I don't have a much remembrance of this, even though it was a few months since I saw it. Next up is Jesus Camp, which is about the charismatic Christian summer camp where children spend their summers being taught that they have prophet gifts and can take back America for Christ. I'm not really familiar with different type of Christian groups other than my Catholicism. Um, I'm gonna have to give this a D on this one, a D plus. I get the idea, but I just think I don't know if I was entertained by it or not. Next up is My Country, which is actually from Laura Poitras, who we will see two of her films a little bit later on in this video, one of which she did one for, which focuses, of course, on Iraq under the U.S. occupation. And as we get to see perspectives not just from the kids in Iraq, but also from the U.S. Army, and also the situations that have been, of course, going on here. This definitely told a lot better. This would have been my pick for 2006. I'm giving this one a B here. On to 2007, and I'll be honest, this is not a very, very weak lineup, honestly. So, like 2003, I think this is a very weak lineup. Interesting, I consider the international feature lineup of 2007 very weak as well. So, we start this up with No End in Sight from Charles Ferguson. He would have his next film that would be nominated later win in 2010. As this follows the American occupation of Iraq during the Iraq War. Same thing with My Country, but I don't remember anything about this movie, so I have to give that an E. Next up, Operation Homecoming, writing the wartime experience, which looks in the writings of U.S. veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. I am giving this one a C. Now, there are some pretty good stories here from some of the veterans that we do follow and their poems, but I think there might be some aspects in the film outside of that probably did not work for me. And then we have Michael Moore's Sicko, which follows the health insurance and healthcare in the United States. I am giving this one a C as well. There are some pretty interesting, unique journeys that Michael Moore has did, but this is kind of similar to what he did with Bowling for Columbine, where he follows obviously this time a couple of the journeys of some of those people that unfortunately cannot be able to get what they want. Even one that has, I believe, some sort of a 9/11 health issue. Like I think a lot of them have, specifically with 9/11 cancers and stuff like that. And they are trying to figure out what is going on, or they might have to go to Canada or something like that, or find out what's going on in the Canadian health system, and how some other people with other health issues, and then finding out that Cuba really has a great healthcare service, and that's what Michael really did, and he really managed to do that well for all those the people that he did do for the movie. I just think there are some portions of it that are kind of a bit off to me, not in the Michael Moore stance, but I think it's just there are some scenes outside of what he does, or just other perspectives from other people might have be the issue, or it's just the pacing. I think it's the pacing of the film. And now we're into Taxi to the Dark Side, the winner of that year, and this is from Alex Ginby. And this is about the December 2002 killing of an Afghan taxi driver named Dilawar, who was beaten to death by American soldiers while being held in an extrajudicial detention and interrogated at the Bagram Air Base. I wonder if this is kind of almost similar to almost like if In the Valley of Eli was a real life movie. Um, that could almost be the thing. I'm sorry to do this, even though it is kind of a very unfortunate what happened. I have to give this an E. I just don't remember anything about this movie. And now we're into War Dance, which is about the three Ocho children living in a Uganda refugee camp who are preparing to compete in the national music competition in Kampala. So yeah, this is an interesting subject matter of having a unique story about dance groups and music groups and stuff like that. I have to give this a C, but it would be a C plus. I think this might be my pick in the 2007 lineup. There are some pretty good moments when they're doing the rehearsing of the dancing or the music and trying to find their right tones. But I think when we go outside of them doing the music stuff, when we look at some of the personal lives, I think that could be the big issue. On to 2008, and we start up with the betrayal Necron. And the subject here is about after the United States secret war in Laos, a Laotian immigrant living in New York City tries to assimilate into American life. So basically, it's just like this entire family, or just specifically this one individual, trying to find a ways in the American life. I'm gonna give this a D plus. Honestly, I don't remember much, but I kind of do understand where I was. I understand what the movie was when I was watching this. And now here comes Encounters at the End of the World from the one and only Werner Herzog. Werner Herzog is a very notable famous filmmaker. He has done a couple of other films. He did his version of Nosferatu in '79. That's what I was familiar with. I think I saw that first before I saw this movie, so I kind of knew who he was, um, since I did saw a previous film from him. I am giving this one an A, and this is basically about him and his cinematographer traveling to Antarctica to meet the people who live and work there. Just getting to see how these people manage to live and survive the coldest place on Earth, and just getting to see what they do and how they do their jobs and stuff like that, and then what they do for their research and how they live. It's a real unique journey, and seeing Herzog and how the other crew are doing, how they also have to experience this journey as well. Even I think for a little volcano that's in there, I believe, or some sort of steamer thing. It's real unique. It's a really fun, kind of a fun movie too. Actually, you want to go to Antarctica to have fun doing some of these jobs, even though it's so cold. Next up, The Garden, which follows the story of the now demolished South Central Farm, which was a community garden and urban farm located in Los Angeles. This was like for a lot of Hispanics that worked on this one that were homeless and stuff like that. And there's this massive battle petition to doing it. I am giving this a C because, yeah, you do really get mad at what the government was doing, and you do kind of really support how the community does it and how they do these farms in order for them to do something instead of being homeless all the time. It's just, I think the pacing, I think, kind of was the problem. Now to our winner, Man on Wire, from James Marsh, who will later do The Theory of Everything, which got Eddie Redmayne his Best Actor Oscar. This obviously one documentary feature, and of course this is about the famous high wire artist Philippe Petit's walking between the two towers at the World Trade Center in the 70s, around the time, if you want to know, around the time when Nixon resigned from his office. If you're familiar with Robert Zemeckis' The Walk, or if you just watch the 15 the main sequence on its own, you might enjoy that a lot more than this documentary, honestly. And I was really looking forward to it, but I'm gonna have to give this an E. I don't remember much of how the story was told or the build up and stuff like that. Yeah, I even prefer The Theory of Everything over Man on Wire in terms of James Marsh here, even though he's only had two nominated films. And then we're into Trouble the Water, which follows a young couple surviving Hurricane Katrina and facing their own troubled past. I don't know, I don't remember what the troubled past is, but yeah, obviously witnessing some family lives in Hurricane Katrina and actually surviving this. Um, it's just, I think the pacing just kind of didn't work well. I'm gonna have to give that a C as well. Wrapping up the 2000s with 2009, we start with Burma VJ reporting from a closed country, which follows the Saffron Revolution against the military regime in Burma, now called Myanmar. Um, like Trouble the Water and some of the other films, the subject definitely seemed interesting, and there are some unique scenes. But there are some scenes I really didn't really know about. There were even some scenes that did not had any English, unfortunately, that I or subtitles that hadn't fully had all the English in. So I have to get that a C. And then we come into our winner here, The Cove from Luis Ioyos. And this is about the analyze the questioning of dolphin hunting practice in Japan. And the filmmaking team tries to expose the Japanese government of how they deal with this. It's very unfortunate of what it is, even though there are some people that do eat fish in real life, but the way how they treat the dolphins, the truth had to be set out. I have to get this an S. This was the right winner to chose it. Unfortunately, what happened in the Oscars, they cut off a bit of the speech and an environmental message that they wanted to bring at the ceremony, but they cut off the music. That was just completely rude. And this is kind of interesting how that and Bowling for Columbine had two controversial moments in the Oscars, not for based on the acceptance speech. Well, one for obviously that was unfortunately kind of rude, that unfortunately they didn't care about the environmental message, especially for dolphins' lives, while Michael Moore just basically called out President George W. Bush. Um, Especially in the invasion of Iraq, of course. That was one of the most famous speeches of the late 2000s, which I forgot to mention. But yeah, that Cove speech should have not been cut off. Unlike Michael Moore, you can understand that even though I don't support Bush, but you can understand how funny it is nowadays. But the Cove speech definitely should have not been cut off. They would fix this, obviously, with the last two documentary feature winners of the century so far, with our 2023 and 2024 winners. They did it right. But if this movie would have been released today, they would have gotten that speech the whole way through. But yeah, very sad documentary to see those dolphins. But yeah, credit to Luis Ayoyos and the entire team for exposing what Japan is doing to these dolphins. Speaking of movies about unfortunately tainting animals' lives, here is Food Incorporated, which examines corporate farming in the United States, concluding the agribusiness produced foods that is unhealthy in a way that is environmentally harmful and abusive of both animals and employees. So this is not just about like animals abusive, but also how farming communities or how the U.S. government treats employees for making these food products. I am giving this one an A. I really did took to this movie as well. Even though I still do kind of eat meat, but there are some people. I think there was a celebrity, an actress, I believe, went vegan after she saw this documentary. I believe. But yeah, it. I can understand why some people would go vegan from this because they would not want to eat anything out of animals and stuff like that. And you can also understand the perspectives of a lot of farmers that have to deal with the situations, and especially how unfortunately they unfortunately cuts their jobs and stuff like that, and exposing some of the bigger corporations that are hiding something big and a massive exposure. There was a sequel that was released 2 years ago or a year or so ago that I did watch after I saw this film. It was fine. I think there was something missing that I think was not right because it would kind of focus a lot more, I think, what happened after the pandemic, but it didn't felt like the same film like it was in the original film. So I do recommend you go watch Food Inc. and The Cove. It would be an interesting back to back movies looking at animal environments, and that's very unfortunate. Next up, the most dangerous man in America, Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. This is, I believe, another PBS documentary which follows on Ellsberg and explores the events leading up to the 1971 publications of those papers, which is exposed the top secret military history in the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Like, not just during the Vietnam War, but even before the Vietnam War. I think, like, during from Kennedy's time and then maybe even from I don't remember from Dwight D. Eisenhower, but definitely during Kennedy's time, LBG's time, and Nixon's time, and how he became like what would be known as a traitor for the American community ended up becoming probably one of the more true heroes of what he did of telling the massive secret of what the U.S. government was hiding to the U.S. citizens at the time. I am giving this one a B. I think there are some scenes that I think should have been taken out, but the subject and following what this man did, he really did sacrifice his life in order to do that, and he really did what he had to do. And finally, for the 2000s, we have Which Way Home, which follows several children who are attempting to get from Mexico and Central America, more like in Guatemala specifically, to the United States, on top of a freight train that crosses Mexico known as La Besta, also known as the Beast. I am giving this one a C. It you do it interesting knowing to the whole story of the kids and how their journey goes from one way to the other, and then how the filmmakers kind of follow them along the journey, and also some of the situations that would be going on in the borders and stuff like that, and why they want to cross over. Obviously, immigration is still a massive issue subject, especially right now in today's standards, even still throughout the 2010s. And this is still obviously a problem, and this movie kind of explores like a child's perspective on it. But there are some scenes I think they could have gone a little bit also more on the border patrol and how their issues are. But the kids definitely really have an interesting journey here. Now onto the 2010s. So one thing to clarify a little bit for those who don't know, like I did the international one, I have done reviews of the documentary films from 2016 through 19. So I already have done reviews on those films. So if you want to see those reviews, you can check that out on excuse me, on my channel here, of course. But you get the idea. So we start this up with Exit Through the Gift Shop, which tells the story of Larry Guti, who over several years filmed a host of street artists at work, including Stephen Ferry and Banksy, but failed to do anything with the footage. Eventually, Banksy decided to use the footage to make his own documentary. And yeah, this movie is about the famous street artist known as Banksy that we will never know who he is. Now, it is very interesting to see the concept of who Banksy was and his art form, but I think looking at the other artists could be the biggest problem, which is why I have to give this to a D, honestly. I really was looking forward to this, but I ended up kind of disappointed on it. Next up is Gasland, which it focuses on the communities in the United States where natural gas drilling activity is a concern, and specifically on a hydraulic fracturing, which is also known as fracking, a method of stimulating production in otherwise impermeable rock. This is basically almost about a climate thing, and obviously how the environmentalist thing is obviously what Josh Fox, the director, did. And I am giving this one, of course, an S. This would have been my pick for 2010, but also, this is my number one Oscar movie of 2010. Yes, even more so than any of the Best Picture nominees, more so than some of the other films in the top 8, even some of the other animated films or international films. A documentary was my number one of 2010. I think it should have been up for picture, director, original screenplay. Since there is a script to this, it should have won documentary feature easily. It is a unique and fantastic movie of just watching all the people that Josh goes to interact with, of their situations they're in their environment, and how this gas is just really too dangerous for them. There was a sequel to this. I was a bit disappointed on that one. Next up, Inside Job from Charles Ferguson, who did No End in Sight, and this focuses on the system corporation of the United States by the financial services industry and the consequences of that system corruption. Basically leads into the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. I am giving this one an E. I don't remember anything about this film. Now it's Restrepo, which it explores the year that Sebastian Junger and Tim Hetherington, the filmmakers of the film, spent on their assignment for Vanity Fair in Afghanistan's Korangal Valley. Just seeing all the perspective of all the veterans that are battling it out during their time in the Afghan War, I am giving this one an A. This unique journey of the two really have seen their perspectives on that. There was a sequel to this film as well. That was fine. But it is unfortunate that Tim Hetherington, one of the directors of the film, was unfortunately killed during the Libyan civil war during his journalistic assignment. That was very unfortunate. The sequel, that was fine, but I really did enjoy this one, just seeing the explanation of these veterans during their mission here, and obviously what they had to do before they almost were planning for their homecoming. And last from 2010, Wasteland, which follows artist Vic Muniz as he travels to the world's largest landfill in Jaim Garmacho, just outside of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, to collaborate with a lively group of catadores, which are workers who salvage recyclable materials from the garbage, to make contemporary art use some of the materials they have picked up. So basically recycling them to make an art piece. I have to give this an E. I just once again, it's another movie I don't really have memories of. On to 2011 with Hell and Back Again, which follows a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps who returns from the Afghanistan conflict with a badly broken leg and post traumatic stress disorder. I am giving this one an S. Learning about this veteran of how he, of not also the deal of his recovery from his leg, but also the flashbacks of his times in his war that we do see. It's just very, very unfortunate of what's going on. Obviously, we have seen like Restrepo where it looks at the soldiers during their service, but this one looks at those that are unlucky, specifically that unfortunately get injured or end up getting losing something like a leg for this guy. And we see his long recovery. This almost was a masterpiece, by the way. I almost gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. I think there was like a minor issue that I do have with the film. Maybe I think it was the ending, but I don't remember. Um, but it is my number two of the year behind the artist. This definitely would have been easily my pick for documentary feature for 2011. Next up, If a Tree Falls, the story of the Earth's Liberation Front, which looks in the rise and fall of the radical environmental group. I am giving this one a B. It has been a bit since I've seen this movie as well. Man, here we go again with that. But I do remember really knowing about what this group was and how the environment also kind of plays as a bit of part of it as well. But the way how Marshall Curry told the story was pretty unique. And now we're into Paradise Lost 3 Purgatory, the third and final installment of this documentary trilogy. For those who don't know, Paradise Lost is the movie series that tells the story about the three teenage boys that were wrongfully accused of that May 1997 murdered and sexually molesting prepubescent boys. That could have been the potential ending, and these three have been accused of this. Obviously, this trilogy is pretty unique. I did saw the first two, and they're really good in one way, shape, or form. Obviously, the first Paradise Lost looks at it looks like they actually did it. Then part two, it looks like there might be some innocence on this one. And then the third and final installment looks at their kind of full innocence, even though they would still have to convict themselves as guilty for doing the murders, even though it looks like throughout the evidence, and even the parents of those boys they unfortunately lost would join on the sides with the West Memphis Three that they were probably wrongfully accused. I am giving this one an A. I think this was a fantastic trilogy to understand where these three have been in since the last film they did. Like the second one, I believe the first one was in '95, I believe. The second one was in 2000, and now this third one made 11 years later in 2010. So Joe Bellinger and Bruce Anowski really told the story very well in this trilogy. And the third one, which is the only one they actually did recognize, is pretty unique to say the least. So yeah, if you have not seen the Paradise Lost trilogy, I highly recommend it. Although, when you get to the first film, it does get a little bit disturbing with the images that we do see at the beginning. But the whole journey where you go from one side to the other when you follow this entire trilogy in order. Next up is Pina from Wim Wenders. So we do get one of Wim Wenders' documentaries that we get to talk about. Oh, this was originally planned for the original idea for Pina Bush, but the maker of this like iconic theater group. But she died unexpectedly, so Wenders canceled the project. But the dancers of Bosch's company, Tanzen Theater Warperdun, convinced him to proceed as planned, memorializing Bosch and her work. So they were going to do a documentary about her and her theater group, but when she died unexpectedly, Wenders was about to cancel it, and then I'm kind of repeating it, but the whole summer, I'm just reading off what the Wikipedia page says, but this is more specifically not just about what she did to all these dancers in multiple different cultures and multiple people from different languages speaking in this film. I am giving this one an A as well. This one was pretty unique of just getting to understand each of the personalities of each of these actors, of what they were doing. There was multiple languages in this film, if I'm correct. Hey, you got some German people, you got some English people, French, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, Slovenian, Korean, and Spanish people. So, like a multicultural film here for many different cultures. This even has a bit of a 3D experience, I believe. I do have the Criterion Blu-ray of this, and I think it did came with a 3D Blu-ray as well. interesting one of those documentaries to do a 3D experience. But yeah, when you see the act, you can understand why the actors really devoted of what Pina did to all these people, and the way how vendors had decided to continue to finish the film on behalf of all the team that wanted to bring her vision to life on the big screen was well worth it. So, as you might have seen, I am really liking the lineup for 2011. It would be perfect, right? Almost. But the one thing is, it's the one that did won was the one I didn't like, Undefeated, which follows a high school American football team, the Manassas Tigers of Memphis, as they attempt a winning season after years of losses. The team is turned around by coach Bill Courtney, who helps form a group of young men into an academic and athletic team. I am giving this one a D. It did really start out pretty good, but then it kind of goes down a bit. I don't know if it's like the personalities or just how the seasons build up. Like, obviously, this is just a high school football season. I get that, but it just didn't felt like how the way the real ending turned out to be. It just didn't do something. I think this was not really worth the win. This was kind of a Weinstein Company movie, so there was a reason why it won. But yeah, this would have been a perfect lineup if they would have nominated something instead of Undefeated. On to 2012, and we start this up with Five Broken Cameras, another Palestine-Israel conflict documentary, which is a first-hand account of protests in Bilan, a West Bank Palestinian villager affected by the Israel-West Bank barrier, where this one Palestinian guy, I believe, films 5 different times of what is going on, courtesy of 5 cameras that unfortunately were shot by the Israel military. So there's still the ongoing conflict between those two countries, of course. I am giving this a C. There are some pretty interesting moments throughout the movie that I did enjoy, but there are some aspects that I don't remember much, so that could be the reason why I had to put it in C. But it's just like there are some unique moments of how is I think it's just the way how the story was told in all those 5 cameras was pretty unique to say the least. Speaking of kind of an Israel thing, here is The Gatekeepers, which follows the Israel Internal Security Service, Shin Bet, from the perspective of 6 of its former heads. So, the leader of the security service thing, I don't remember anything. I have to give that an E. I just don't remember anything. Next up, How to Survive a Plague, which is the beginnings of the Act Up and Tag during the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. It's just basically, obviously, the massive protest to find a way to stop the spread of AIDS, even though we know still to this day there is still no cure for that. I am putting this one in B. The way how you see all these unfortunate people that unfortunately got AIDS, you can see how struggle the battle is and how they're dealing with the government and how they feel like they're kind of how the government or the police kind of views them as the enemy or stuff like that. This was almost kind of early stages also of LGBTQ plus rights in the U.S. as well, although it doesn't go much into that aspect because it kind of focuses on the AIDS portion of it. But it is really well taught here. Next up, The Invisible War, which follows reports of sexual assaults in the United States military, specifically a lot of female members of the Army that were unfortunately assaulted. The way how Kirby Dick, and yes, that's actually his real last name, um, told the story, very unfortunate how it is. I have to give this an S. This would have been my pick for documentary for 2012. I mean, it's very unfortunate how these women unfortunately have this trauma they have in the back of what happened. And all those men that committed those acts really did deserve it. And the way how it took so long for the reports and just how the buildup occurred, it really was well taught. And you can see why Kirby Dick would have a later influence of also making a film called The Hunting Ground in 2015, which earned an original song nomination for Lady Gaga and Diane Warren, which almost won. But I haven't seen that film yet, but I can understand, now I understand if I see The Hunting Ground, I can understand why they would recognize The Invisible War before he would make that film. And now into our winner, Searching for Sugar Man, which details the efforts in the late 1990s of 2 Cape Town fans to find out whether the rumored death of the American musician Sixto Rodriguez was true, and if not, to discover what had become of him. Rodriguez's music, which had never achieved success in his home country in the United States, had become very popular in South Africa, although little was known about him there. So yeah, a famous long-lost musician in the U.S. spent most of the rest of his life in South Africa, thinking he was, where many people thought he was actually dead or not. But no, he was actually alive when they did the film. I am giving this one an E because I don't remember anything about this movie. Unfortunately, I don't. I'm not really familiar with Sixto Rodriguez's music. Obviously, as I stated, he wasn't really big here in the United States compared to South Africa. So that's kind of unfortunate. On to 2013, and we started with The Act of Killing by Joshua Oppenheim, which follows individuals who participate in the Indonesia mass killings of 1965 through 66, where an alleged communist and people opposed to the New Order regime were tortured and killed, with the killers many become gangsters, still in power throughout the country. It's basically a recreation of those murders back in the late 60s, and that's why it's called The Act of Killing. It's kind of a recreation of telling the story. I have to give this an E. I don't remember anything about this movie. Another movie I don't have any memories of is Cutie and the Boxer, which follows the chaotic 40-year marriage of two artists, Noriko Shinohori and her husband, the boxing painter Ushiro. Yeah, so interesting. So, using boxing equipment as a piece of art, very creative, but I don't remember anything, so it's also going to go into E. Here's another one that might be going to E, Dirty Wars, which investigates journalist Germany Scahill travels to Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, and other countries where the United States has taken military action in the War of Terror. I don't remember anything about this, so I have to also, excuse me, I have to put this also in E. Then it's The Square, which depicts the Egyptian crisis from 2011 through 2014, starting with the 2011 Egyptian revolution at Tahrir Square. Um, I do remember portions of this, and I did kind of liked it a little bit when I first saw it, but thinking a little bit more about that recently and not remembering much, I have to give it a C, but it would be like a C plus. And then the one that I do agree with the Academy on this one, 20 Feet from Stardom. This is actually directed by Morgan Neville, who will later on do Won't You Be My Neighbor. And using archival footage and new interviews, it details behind the scenes experience of such backup singers such as Darlene Love, Mary Clayton, Lisa Fisher, Judith Hill, Joe Lowry, Claudia Lerner, and Tata Vega. Obviously, Darlene Love is obviously the most notable one. If you are a Macy's Parade fan, you might know who she is because she had participated in 2006, 2020, and just last year in 2025 with her iconic song "Christmas Baby, Please Come Home." And she was even there at the Oscars and did a little singing for the acceptance speech, even though she was not a nominee in that. I am giving this one a B. Pretty good documentary, obviously, but Morgan Neville would improve himself as a documentary filmmaker with Won't You Be My Neighbor, of course. But this was a kind of a decent appetizer for, I would say, what would be the main course you would do with a Fred Rogers one. Next up, 2014, and we start this up with Citizen 4 from Laura Poitras, and this is, of course, about Edward Snowden. And it's about him and his whistleblowing movement on American espionage on foreign officials through his WikiLeaks website. I am giving this one a B. This one really, you can understand why Snowden really almost feels like he's either a hero or a traitor, but obviously with the filmmakers getting that full experience of what he was doing, because we kind of knew, I remember knowing about how the face of the man, but now understanding when you're going through the movie, you can understand it. I know there was also the Snowden movie from Oliver Stone starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt that was released like in 2017 or 16. Yeah, it was 16, I believe, and that didn't do anything. But yeah, if you want the real story of how Edward Snowden did it, definitely watch this one. Now, here's the one that I wanted to talk about the most here, and that is Finding Vivian Maier, which is about the street photographer Vivian Maier and the rediscovery of her photography. Wow. The way John Maloof and Charlie Siskel, the directors of the film, told the story, phenomenally well done. And because the thing about it is not knowing also what she was doing, but this is also like showing how she did photography as an art form. Like, like this is kind of similar, I would say, almost not really similar to what Never Look Away does, but you get to experience who this unknown artist was and what she was doing with her realm of photography as well as videography, because even she viewed videography filmmaking as a view of art form. This was not about the movie industry. She views the filmmaking thing as a view of art form, because the documentary branch is not really a fan about movies about filmmaking, but this is an exception because it's more about the art form, of course. But it also kind of goes into some of her personal things, and even there were some personal issues, positively and negatively, they did went into, especially nearing the last act of the film, of really showing something dark that she did, and it was, well, it was kind of a shocking, but it does kind of knowing who this woman was in general. I was blown away by it when I first saw it, and I considered it a masterpiece and the best nominee in the category. So, yep, this documentary is going to double S tier. I love this film. I recommend, if you are in the film of the artist industry of photography or filmmaking, and I even recommend people who want something in the filmmaking industry, I highly recommend you check this out, because the way how these two investigate who this woman is, it just, like, you can tell she is an artist, but you also understand who she was as a person as well, both positively and negatively. Next up is Last Days in Vietnam, which is about during the chaotic finale weeks of the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese army closes in as Saigon as the panicked South Vietnamese people desperately attempt to escape. On the ground, American soldiers and diplomats confront whether they to obey White House orders to evacuate American citizens only. I think I did like a little bit of the beginning portions of it, but it just didn't really do much, I think, in the second half, so I have to give this a C on this one. Now here is Wim Wenders' The Salt of the Earth, which it portrays the works of Salgado's father, the Brazilian acclaimed photographer Sebastian Salgado. So this is almost kind of similar to Finding Vivian Maier, but unlike that film, I don't think the way how Wenders taught this didn't really work that for me, and I don't remember anything. I maybe even boredom, honestly. I have to give this an E. And then we got Virunga, which focuses on the conservation work of park rangers within the Congo's Virunga National Park during the rise of the violent M23 rebellion in 2012, and investigates the activity of the British oil company Soko International within the UNESCO World Heritage Site. I don't remember anything about this movie. I don't think it even was about the chimpanzees or monkeys or gorillas that we see in the movie, so or in the promotional material. So I have to get that an E. Next up, 2015, and we've got one of the actual frontrunners that did made it in the nominations and got the win, and that is Amy, which of course looks at the life and death of British singer Amy Winehouse. Now, I didn't really know who Amy Winehouse was when this documentary was started to get nominated. Of course, I remember the season, and then I do know the song "Rehab" a bit. I do remember listening to that in I think in a health class or something like that. I don't remember. Um, but now coming into this film, this might be a bit of a controversial one here as well. Uh, I think the last act really was well done, but I don't know what it was. I don't know if they told too much of her music, or they didn't. I don't know how the filmmaking was. I think it was just the pacing of the film that could be my big gripe with the movie. Why it didn't took well to Amy, and mainly because since I'm not really familiar, was not familiar with her music, even during the documentary, with the exception of the song "Rehab." And obviously, we have seen many documentaries or about a famous music artist that would unfortunately die from some sort of an overdose. So this is kind of like not the first time we've seen something like this. Next up, Cartel Land, which is about the vigilante groups fighting Mexican drug cartels during the Mexican drug war. Kind of a coincidence when Sicario was released in the same year as this film. I don't remember anything about this, so I have to give that. I'm gonna give it a D because it's a D minus, because the subject was interesting, but I think it just didn't told well execution wise. Next up, The Look of Silence, Joshua Oppenheimer's follow up to The Act of Killing, and it's actually kind of a companion piece, which is another film following the Indonesian mass killings, but like from some of the civilians that were witnessing there. I don't really remember anything about this either, so I have to give that an E. Amy was not the only music documentary that was nominated in 2015. And we even got, well, technically The Square was actually the first Netflix film to be nominated in the category, but this one was kind of primarily from Netflix themselves. What Happened, Miss Simone, about the life and troubled times of singer and civil rights activist Nina Simone. Um, this one was also kind of a bit of a questioning for me. Like I do know the song "Ain't Got No Like Shoes" or something like that. Like I did saw that performance. But I'm not really like with Amy Winehouse. I'm not really familiar with the works of Nina Simone or her music, so I have to put this in E again. I just don't remember anything also about the movie in general. And then we come into my pick for 2015, another Netflix documentary, Winter on Fire, Ukraine's Fight for Freedom, which looks at Ukraine's fight for freedom during the Revolutionary of Dignity. So this was obviously around the time when Ukraine was a country that was really under, like, I think a military or police law dictatorship. And now, where they are now as a country is now like a very strong ally to that we do support, especially right now going on in the war in Ukraine. In fact, when the war in Ukraine was going on, Netflix decided to release this documentary for free on YouTube. And seeing it, it really is unfortunate where the Ukrainian citizens were dealing with the government they had at the time, and now they are under the leadership of a real true hero to them with Vladimir Zelensky now, and how the revolution of the dignity really began before Zelensky was elected, and now how we all support that country during these tough times during this war in Ukraine. I am giving that one a B. Um, there are like I do like a lot of the scenes in the movie, but I don't. But I'm not really sure if they went much into like what was on the political side of things, and like you can understand how real life evil those politicians were. But it obviously focused a lot more on the Ukrainian citizens and getting. I think it was like I think we follow a lot too much people. I believe in the film. I think that could be the biggest. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but yeah, this movie definitely shows you why we do support now Ukraine. Now, as we mentioned, from 2016 through 2019, I've already have talked about these films for a couple of reviews I have done. So some of them I will have to make a little bit of a clarification of what I've said in the review. But if you want to see my thoughts on these films, you can go check out some of the reviews out. So starting for 2016, we start up with the Italian film Fire at Sea, which looks at the life at Lampedusa, Italy. I gave it a B on this one. Next up is one of the probably the most one that the title that probably is the most one that stands out the most. I Am Not Your Negro, and this is basically an unfinished memoir from James Baldwin about being black in America. Um, there are some decent footages in the film, but I had to give that a D. Next up, Life Animated, which looks at Owen Suskind, son of a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Ron Suskind, who is diagnosed with autism, learning about life and communication through the life of classic Disney animated films. I have talked about this in my review, but even though I am a person with Asperger's syndrome, I I'm sorry to do this, but I had to put this in D. Now, the thing about it is I've talked about this in my review, but I really wish there was a lot more of the Disney aspect to it because that's what I was expecting. Because obviously, when it comes to movies about documentaries, they obviously focus a lot about the movies, but this one obviously focuses more on the overlooked aspect of movies in general, and that's the viewer. And you don't usually see a movie about a documentary about people who use movies for their life, and I can even do so somewhat myself. Not much in today's standards through animated films, but more of like narrative films and stuff like that. You can even say through television stuff like that, because it does bring you life valuable lessons. But I would say after when the Disney aspect is gone and we just focus on himself on his life, like yeah, it is a bit struggling to live on your own, but it's not really that told well. I would say I think maybe because with the filmmakers there probably might have gotten them a little bit not too personal. I would say, but it's just like seeing his journey through the screen, I don't. It's not well because with me having Asperger's is a little bit different compared to somebody who has regular autism. But I think it's just without the Disney aspect anymore. I think when it was left in the second half, I think that's when I think kind of really I was disappointed on that one. And then, of course, we come into the only technically documentary series to be nominated and win this. OJ Made in America from ESPN, which is the examination of racial divides in America during the OJ Simpson saga. In 5 different parts of where he started out as a young college football player during the civil rights movement, and then the second part's about him and his relationship with his wife Nicole Brown, and then the third part is like about the murder and obviously to the build up to the trial. The fourth part is about the trial, and the fifth part is about what happened to the trial plus his 2007 Vegas robbery. Um, Whoa, boy. Even though they did change the rules after it won the Oscar, but it did got a theatrical release, so it did technically count, and I think it's probably the maybe the best winner in the category's history. Not a masterpiece, but I am giving this an S. I talked a lot about this in my review, and I think the review kind of also stated that as well. And finally, 13th from Ava DuVernay, who did Selma, and this looks at the 13th Amendment and its effects on African Americans. I am putting this one in A. It's been a bit since I've seen this movie, but if you go see my review of the film, I think it would freshen my mind why I really did took to the film. 2017, and we begin this with Abacus Small Enough to Jail, which is actually directed by Steve James, the man who made Hoop Dreams and the Roger Ebert documentary Life Itself. So he had snubbed for 2 famous documentary movies he made, and this is the first movie from him to get a documentary feature nomination. Although Hoop Dreams did got that film editing nomination back in '94, but it's ironic that out of all the documentaries they recognize, it's this one, which is about a family-owned community bank, Abacus Federal Savings Bank, the only financial institutions to face criminal charges following the subprime mortgage crisis. Basically like this Chinese American bank. I am giving that one a B, but it would be a B minus. Like I said, if you want to see my thoughts, check out the reviews. And then, of course, we have Faces Places, which looks at Agnes Varda, the famous French documentary filmmaker, and artist JR traveling around rural France creating portraits of their people they come across. It's kind of like an interesting road trip movie, and this was the same year when she got an honorary Oscar. Even though she's gone, I have to give that an E. And then we come to the first feature-length Netflix film to win an Oscar, if you go by the year order, 2017 with Icarus, which looks at the film's director Brian Fogel's exploration of the option of doping to win an amateur cycling race and happen upon a major international doping scandal when he asked for the help of Grigory Radshevsky, the head of the Russian anti-doping laboratory. So basically it's like about the investigation of Russia cheating at these sporting events like the Olympics of doping their athletes so they can win. And obviously, one of the head people behind it gets, obviously, who kind of helps with the Americans, is viewed as a traitor and has now kind of been exiled a bit, but has been secretly hiding still to this day where we do not know where he is at now. Even when they won the Oscar, they still don't know where he is at. I talked about this in my review, and yeah, it's going to go into E because it's not garbage or anything like that. It's not F, but I say just watch my review of the film. I don't think this was not my pick for the Oscar. Then we have Last Men in Aleppo from Faris Fayyad, which looks at the lives of the 3 White Helmet founders, Khalid Omar-Hari, Subadi al-Hossein, and Mohammed, as they grappled the dilemma to flee their country or stay and fight for it. Obviously, there was a documentary short the previous year, The White Helmets, which won that. And this is obviously one of the few documentaries about the Syrian civil war going on. Even though some of these heroes unfortunately did risk their lives, I have to give this a D on this one. I think it's just the way how the movie was told. I think it was just a pacing again. And then my pick, and what should have been the Netflix film that should have taken the win in this category, Strawn Island, which looks at the April 1992 murder of William Ford. the brother of the film's director, Yancey Ford, who came out as transgender during the production of the movie. I am giving this one an A. It really kind of tells a great investigation story of what he was trying to find out of how his brother unfortunately was murdered, and it's very, very unfortunate. And then on to 2018 with Free Solo from Elizabeth Shafar-Sahali and Jimmy Chin, which looks at Alex Honnold as he attempts to become the first person to ever free solo climb Yosemite National Park's 3,000 foot high El Capitan Wall. I mean, the climb itself, watching that movie through his climbing, that was just fantastic. And he managed to successfully do that. But the rest of the event of the movie before the event had actually occurred, I have to give that a C. I did kind of like the massive event, but everything prior to it and maybe a little after it, not by much. Next up, Hale County This Morning, This Evening, from Romel Ross, who would later on direct Nickel Boys, and this looks at the lives of black people in Hale County, Alabama. I did not understand this movie whatsoever. So, yeah, I have to give this an F. I just didn't understand this movie when I saw it. My review basically more explains about it. Next up, kind of technically the first Hulu film to be nominated here, Minding the Gap, which looks at the lives and friendships of three young men growing up in Rockford, Illinois, united by their love of skateboarding, including the filmmaker himself, Ben Liu, on one dealing with a job, one dealing probably with, I forget what the other one is, and then Ben Liu's relationship with his mother. I am giving that one a C. My review also kind of basically explains that as well. Next, Of Fathers and Sons, another Syrian Civil War documentary which looks at radical jihadism and terrorist training in Syria during, of course, this war. I am giving that one a D. It's just having these. Obviously, this is a narrative documentary, but seeing the perspective, like having kids to do these military trainings, that's just unfortunate. And then, of course, we've got the famous RBG, the life and legacy of the career of the Associate Justice Supreme Court member Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It also earned an original song nomination for All Fight that was written by Diane Warren, the music branch's favorite songwriter, even though they don't give her the wins. Even though I'm an independent, I really did love this movie and really had a massive appreciation to her. I am giving this one, and I'm giving that an S, especially how she has a unique journey, not just how she started up to all the way to the Supreme Court, but even her friendship with Anthony Scalia, who was a Republican, and how even though they are opposing parties, they really have a great friendship to one another. So she really warmed my heart when I was watching that documentary. To 2019, and we go with American Factory, our winner film here, once again from Netflix, which looks at the Chinese company's Fuyos factory in Moraine that occupies Moraine Assembly that took over a Shutter General Motors plant. And this is kind of a sequel to the filmmaker's Oscar-nominated documentary short film, The Last Truck, Closing of a GM Plant, which I did not watch. I might have to watch that soon. I am giving this one, I did like it when I first, yeah, I'm going to give this a B. I didn't like it, a bit. Yeah, it's been a bit since I've seen this movie, like Abigail Small Enough to Jail, but I did remember how all the union workers, how they are, from the perspective of them, how they are doing as a company, and also how they are building up that strike and stuff like that. Next up, The Cave, another film from Faraz Fayad and another Syrian Civil War documentary, which looks at Dr. Amani Balor. I do apologize if I get that incorrect. A doctor in Ghouta who is operating a makeshift hospital nicknamed The Cave during, obviously, the Syrian Civil War. I am giving this one an A. I think this really was a massive improvement to Last Man in Aleppo, but obviously looking at, the people that are trying to help these children. And Dr. Amani, I mean, I said in my review in that I would just want to give her a hug for what she was doing her best to save all these children and all the people's lives at that hospital, especially for the children. Next up, The Edge of Democracy from Petra Costa, which her next film, Apocalypse in the Tropics, might get nominated for documentary feature for 2025 for this upcoming Oscars. But we'll see. I'm recording this on the 11th. and this looks at her political past in a personal way in context with the first term of President Luis Inacio Lula da Silva and the events leading to the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. I mean, wow. Yeah, it's a bit. I do apologize for the mispronouncing Portuguese pronunciations here. Um, but honestly, I have to give this an E. If you've seen my review of the film, I will. That's more of an explanation. Next up for Sama, another Syrian civil war documentary, which of course looks at one of the directors, Walda Kapti, and her journey as a journalist and rebel in the war, as she and her husband raised their daughter Sama in another children's hospital in Syria. I'm giving that one. The filmmaking aspect did work interestingly of how she uses her video camera for it, but I'm gonna have to give that an E as well. Unfortunately, I probably talked a little bit about that in my review. And then, of course, we got the film I talked about in the international feature list, Honeyland, of course, the North Macedonia film, which looks at the life of Hadius Mortova, a loner beekeeper of wild bees who lives in the remote mountain village of Belkorosha, I do apologize, in North Macedonia. Um, I have talked about this, of course, in the international tier list, so I put that in S. This would have been my pick for 2019. Now we're into this decade so far in the 2020s. We start up with 2020, of course, and we begin with the Romanian Documentary Collective, which looks at the 2016 public health scandal following the collective nightclub fire. I have talked about this in the international tier. I had put that in D. Then we go into one of the two Netflix films up in this list, starting with Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution, which looks at Camp Junaid, campers who turned themselves into activists for the disability rights movement in the 1970s, and follows their fight for accessibility legislation. So, yeah, I really did have a fond connection with this movie, even though this focuses a lot more on the physical disability side instead of the mental ones. But, yeah, understanding some of the personalities of some of these who would become big major activists, this definitely would have been my pick. I am giving that one an A. Next up, the Chilean film The Mole Agent from Maita Alberti, which looks at a private investigator named Romulo who hires Sergio, an elderly man, to go undercover in a nursing home in Chile. And this would actually be the basis of a Netflix series, I believe, starring John Krasinski, I believe, or there's a John Maloney, I forget what it was. I am giving that a C. Now, the Sergio Shami, that's his real name. He was a fantastic person in this movie. Even though it's not really a casting movie, because this is not a narrative feature, but this narrative documentary feels like a narrative feature, and it almost feels like you want to reward this person for what he did in this movie. The actual investigation, not by much. I'm not really a fan of that whole scenario. Then we come into our winner in this, My Octopus Teacher from Netflix, which looks at a year spent by filmmaker and the producer of the film, Craig Foster, forging a relationship with a wild common octopus in a South African kelp forest. Obviously with me growing up watching Finding Nemo and just almost seeing some fish tanks a lot in my life, I did had a kind of a fun time with this. I do have to go with an A on this one. And just this unique friendship between a filmmaker and a wild animal is just pretty interesting. And then we come to the racial film from Amazon Time, which looks at Sylvie Fox Richardson's fighting for the release of her husband Rob, who is serving a 60-year prison sentence for engaging in an armed bank robbery. I don't feel like I just by the film itself, how it was told, I will say, not with the subject matter, I have to give that an E. I just don't know where else to go because it's not F. It's not a terrible movie. I think maybe because of the black and white aspect might be the off-putting for me, but I'm not really sure. On to 2021, we start with Ascension, which looks at the pursuit of the Chinese dream. Just basically the Chinese workforce, and this was pre-pandemic status. This was like starting film like what, mid 2010s or something like that, or like 2016 or 15 or something like that. I'll be honest, I have to put that in double F tier because here's the thing. There is nothing to that movie. There is just nothing. It's just like you just see people just working on stuff, and that's it. There's like no convolutions, no anything like that. Now, this is pre-pandemic core status. You got to remember that, as I stated. But there's just nothing to the movie. It's just like it's almost like you take Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but you take out the main climax in the end, and it's just basically what you get. It's just nothing but filler. That's what this movie is kind of is. You're just seeing montage of people working even for sex dolls or stuff like that. Ugh, or even some people. That's just wrong. Next up is Attica, which looks at the infamous 1971 Attica prison riot. The subject really seemed interesting, and the opening started fantastically. But the way how it was built up through the rest of the film, not by much. So I had to get that a D. I mean, the opening started out phenomenally, but it kind of really went downhill in how the story was taught, as I stated. And then, of course, we have our first animated film nominated in the category, Flea, which looks at Amin Alawi, obviously going under that fictional name, who shares his hidden past of his fleeing from his home country of Afghanistan to Denmark for the first time. And I've already talked about this. This goes into A tier. This would have been my pick in the category. So, one of the most openly members of not just the Academy, but also one of the most openly members of the documentary branch is Amir Questlove Thompson of The Roots, Jimmy Fallon's late night band. So his movie, Summer of Soul, or The Revolution Cannot Be Televised, not also as a frontrunner that gets nominated but ends up winning, and of course looks at the 1969 Harlem Culture Festival, going around at the same time as Woodstock was. Sorry, Questlove, even though you openly stated, won't you be my neighbor, you didn't vote for it, for obvious reasons, but your movie itself, not really that entertaining, honestly. I mean, maybe if you took out the interviewees out of this movie, I think this probably worked a lot better just watching the concert itself. I think probably my only highlight was the former lead singer of The Temptations doing My Girl, and that's probably the only thing I do remember about Summer of Soul. And then we got Writing with Fire, which looks at the journalist running the Dalit woman led newspaper Kahabri Larari, this is in India, as they shift from 14 years of print to digital journalism using smartphones. Now, that was a very creative way to doing that. And the way how they told their stories, but there's some sort of a big story they kind of fall into, and it doesn't really go much into the big aspect of them as a company going the transition. I am giving that one a C on this one, but it would be a C minus. On to 2022, and we start this up with All That Breathes, which looks at two brothers devoted their lives to protect one casualty of the turbulent times, the bird known as the Black Knight. I don't remember anything about this, so I have to give that an E. I think I just remember what their bird station, and that's it. And now here is All the Beauty and the Bloodshed from Laura Poitras, who did Citizen 4, and this was the Golden Lion winner of the Venice Film Festival, which looks at the life of artist Nan Goldin and the downfall of the Sackler family. And this is basically kind of like a protest or something like that of how the issues are going on. But the way I was kind of told, honestly, I was a bit disappointed on this one, so I have to get that a D. Then we have Fire of Love, which looks at the life and the career of the daring French volcanologist Katie and Maurice Kraft, who were ultimately killed in the 1991 eruption of Mount Unzen. That build up, obviously, that tragedy, hearing about that, that was very unfortunate. And seeing the footages they had before the eruption, that was really scary to see that. But the rest of the movie, just not really. Kind of also disappointing as well, so I have to give that a D. And now we have the pre-Russian Ukrainian war documentary, A House Made of Splinters, which looks at the career of the staff on the institution for children who had been removed from their homes. This is kind of like not really a nursery or a foster parents, but this is more like an under Ukrainian government rule, specifically those children in the Ukrainian census that have either lost their parents or have divorced parents or a single parent that obviously cannot have the full custody of. They stay in this like main facility before they would move on to an actual orphanage. If they would end up getting back with their biological parents or end up getting adopted, and you see their perspectives from multiple kids, whether do or do not. it is very, very sad to see where the kids are going. This is a pre-Russian Ukrainian war documentary, so this was before the war. I am giving that one an A. I mean, just seeing these kids' experiences and how they really want to get out of there and get back with their families is very sad. And then we have our winner, Navalny, which looks at obviously the opposition leader at the time, Alexei Navalny, and his investigation of of his infamous poisoning before he would get detained in Russia and unfortunately die a year after this movie won the Oscar. I am giving that one a D as well. I mean, yeah, we can all agree we all hate Russia right now, and he was probably a real true hero. But it's just, I think we went a little bit too much on his investigation of the poisoning instead of like him being the biggest Russian opponent lead. Or I think it was just the balancing of the two. I think just didn't work well. Next up into 2023, and we start this up with Bobby Wine, the People's President, which looks at the campaigning trail of Ugandan politician, singer, and actor Bobby Wine leading to the 2021 Uganda general election. It does make you mad of where the Uganda leader is. It's just like obviously you can tell that was a massive rig system what happened in the real life. But this movie did not need to be a bit long, honestly. That just did not need to really be ridiculously long. I have to give that an E. Next, The Eternal Memory. This is Maida Birdie again, who did The Mole Agent. And this is about the relationship between Patrick's Paulina Ureti and journalist Augusto Gonata as they struggle with Gorgona's Alzheimer's disease diagnosis. So, and it kind of also goes into a little bit about the Chilean movement a bit. If you have seen the Pablo Larraín Snow, it kind of also goes in that in the journalist perspective. But I think balancing the two, I think just didn't work well. I'm gonna have to give that one a D on that one. Next up, Four Daughters, the Tunisian documentary from Kauto Benahunina, who did The Man Who Sold His Skin, and of course the voice of Henry Job. And it's basically about after two daughters of a Tunisian woman disappeared, the filmmaker invites professional actors to compensate for their loss. Basically, just two sisters just basically having actresses playing the sisters to recreate moments, and also finding out what the real daughters, what crime they actually committed. I have to give that one an E. I don't remember much of it other than some of the footages, especially when we see some of the real footages of the real missing daughters. Next up is To Kill a Tiger, which is about a family in Jharkhand, India, campaigning for justice for the teenage daughter who was brutally raped. So, yeah. Uh, the investigation definitely really had something, but I think it took a bit too long, honestly, and I almost kind of fall asleep, honestly. I am giving that one a C. Because the story definitely seemed interesting, and there were a lot of great moments, but of her investigation and trying to figure out to commit the justice. Even the daughter, not also justice, but there was even a portion of the time, like near and during the climax during the trial, where she even had to sleep with the filmmaking team, away from like her relatives or stuff like that, or staying out of the public domain a bit. And then, of course, we come probably is one of the two most important winners of this decade so far, and probably my pick of the winner of the decade so far, and rightfully agreed. The Ukrainian documentary 20 Days in Mariupol, one of the few PBS documentaries in recent years to get a theatrical release. And this looks at the 20 days spent by the filmmaker Mishan Chernov and his colleagues in Bezograd, Mariupol after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Like the first 20 days of the war, this is easily going to S. It is a very devastating movie and just makes you really mad at Russia for what they're doing. I mean, not just specifically how Mishon really is seeing the perspective of what's actually going inside of Russia, but also how many civilians and especially how many children lost their lives during the invasion and how secretly the filmmaking team has to hide away from any of the Russian armies that are coming through, especially tank cars, and seeing where Mariupol is at. It's just very, very unfortunate. Michelin Chernoff really gave an old-time speech. The best speech of that year's ceremony, where he regrets doing this movie and rather exchange his Oscar to Vladimir Putin to save his country, for the country's freedom. And he really made a great speech, like images, like I forgot how he put in his quote, but the quote he said about images make memories or something like that. and how documentaries are also a medium of cinema as well, although he didn't state that like Guillermo del Toro said in the animated side. But yeah, this film just basically told you that documentaries are movies as well. Well, it's also for television as well, but in terms of theatrical movies like that one, they are real true cinema as well, and he really gave an all-time speech on that. But there is the next winner, of course, from the following year that also gave the best speech of that ceremony's night. So we end in 2024, of course, and we begin this up with Black Box Diaries, which looks at the investigation of into Shiro Itoto's own sexual assault case committed by Noriko Yamagachi, the director of the Tokyo Broadcast System. And this is basically like trying to fight for her right of actually calling out the entire Tokyo Broadcast System of her sexual harassment she was unfortunately dealing with in the workplace. And this took so many years to make. This was like even before the Me Too movement. I think this was like 2016 or 15 when the movie started, where it takes place. And how many years that built up. And she really was a woman that really fought for her power. I am giving that one an A. She really did a phenomenal job of telling her story, um, both on and off camera. She really knew what she had to do, and I would love to give her a hug on that for being a woman to fighting for her right, and no woman should not be touched like that. And then we come into our last winner of this decade so far, even though it's not the last one we're talking about because we're going by alphabetical order. And that is, of course, No Other Land, which is the struggle of the Palestinian activists over the destruction of the Masaf Yatta villages during the occupation of the Israel army. And this was one of the massive elements that were bring up into the war in Gaza. This started, like Black Box Diaries, this started even before the pandemic. This was like I think 2018 or 19 when it started, or 17. I don't remember, but obviously Basil Aldred, the Palestinian citizen, and Yuval Abraham, the Israel citizen that does support the Palestinians, like two Palestinians and two Israelis, both directed, produced, and wrote the film, since there's technically a screenplay to the film, and all four of them get to see like this is like you get mad at what Israel's doing to the innocent civilians in Palestine, just taking away all their homes because they want to occupy more of the land. Um, and then obviously that would be one of the aspects that would lead into the Gaza war. I am giving this one a B. Not like there is a lot of other aspects when it comes to some of the other documentaries as well here in this lineup. Um, then also you did felt angry at what happened in real life, but obviously the filmmakers told them a really well persona, and obviously this is a movie why you would definitely want to support Palestine over Israel because they're taking away their own lands. And obviously Basil and Yuval gave the best speech of last year's ceremony, and like unlike with the Kova course, with 20 Days in Mariupol and No Other Land, they managed to not cut off the director's speeches off, with Michelin with his Ukraine speech and Basil and Mikla with their speech on the Israel-Palestine conflict. They managed not to cut that off because everyone agrees it's a difficult situation that's currently on right now that everyone knows. And I'm glad they didn't cut them off on their speech last year. And then we have Porcelain War, which looks at the experience of Ukrainian artists as they face the current Russian occupation, of course, in Ukraine. Of trying to basically making these little art pieces. Mainly, a lot of them are army people, and not also in a way for them to use some unique ideas like with drones to help them battle it out with Russia, but also with their personal stories. Honestly, I was kind of disappointed on this one. I have to give that a D. I think it's just we didn't get much of the war aspect, but more of the personal lives of them. If it was balanced in between, I think it would have done a lot better. Now into my pick in the category for if I would have voted for last year, this would have been my pick, and that is Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which looks at the political background of the crash of Abby Lincoln and Max Roach at the UN Security Council and the protest of the murder of Patrice Lumumba. Basically, this looks at the Cold War aspect in Africa, something that is usually very overlooked when people talk about the Cold War, because you think of obviously what's going on in Europe, North America, South America, and Asia. but never much in the African territories. But you do follow stuff like in Ghana and I forgot what the other one was. I forgot what the other country was, but I know Ghana was one of them. And then how the ambassador for the Soviet Union for the United Nations was like a real life villain, and just like obviously they decide to bring all these American African artists to perform at during in these massive communist countries to have a strong kind of try to build up a relationship, but in actuality it was a build up to basically kill the leaders because they're black, which would lead to civil rights issues. So kind of a racial thing. I am giving that one an A. The way how the editing was told was just the way how it was edited really told the story very well done, especially the sound design was fantastic of combining that archival footage, really well done as well. And then finally, we got Sugarcane, which looks in the investigation into the abuse and disappearance of Canadian Indigenous children in the nearby Sugarcane Reserve. A Catholic um, issue, of course. So, yeah, a Catholic sex abuse scandal, of course, when it comes to priests and even maybe even some nuns and stuff like that during Canada. This was like filmed in the mid 2010s, I would say, because this was around the time when Pope Francis was still good on his physical health, because there was footage of him when some Canadian survivors, Indigenous survivors, would be there at the Vatican. I am giving this one a B on this one. It would be a B plus. The way how Julian Brave Noise Cat goes into his investigation of his family, specifically his father's side of what was going on, and just seeing how the cultures of Indigenous in Canada has been, especially when it comes to the sour relationship between the Indigenous community in Canada and the Catholic Church. It really is unfortunate, and obviously there would be a lot of makeup for that, even after when this movie is released, with Pope Francis making a trip to Canada um, sometime earlier in the decade before this, like after when this movie was done filming, I would say, and then obviously before the movie was released. So for this final balance here, 43 movies in the documentary category I did liked, and 82 I found just okay, disappointment, bored, or just didn't like in general. Especially with Hale County this morning, this evening, and especially with Ascension being on the double F tier, because that movie had nothing in general. So yeah, not a fantastic balance here compared to the other tier lists, with the Best Picture tier list, the non-Best Picture top 8 tier list, and the international feature tier list. So yeah, you can tell I'm not really big on a lot of documentaries. There were some that had great subjects, but there were some scenes that were editing issues that could be the reason why some of them prevented from being in the B tier, especially some of that were a lot in the C tier that could have been in B. Like, they all have great moments, but they have some not so good moments as a movie in general. So yeah, these 43 films are the only ones that I would remember with, especially Finding Vivian Meyer being a true masterpiece. So that was one thing that managed to get something on like the international films, is actually getting a masterpiece and the best nominee in the category of the first 25 years of the century. But it looks like there was a lot I really didn't care for, of course, as you can see by the result. So that kind of wraps up the documentary feature tier list. If you're new to the channel, you can hit that subscribe button. The next time we come back, and hopefully before the Oscar nominations be released, one more tier left to do, and that will be even though there's only going to be 24 years in this one, but if we're going by the first 25 years of cinema, it would just be from 2001 through 2024. The only tier list we have left is the Best Animated Feature tier list. The one that I think many of you guys are excited for the most.